how much time they spent trying to reduce their risk. What they have to show also is that they're interested in investing in the companies.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. It's not like they had to put out $100 million again.
Right, and the deal went south. No, yeah.
So they're getting what is speculation.
It's an amazing shakedown mechanism. I mean, when you think about it, it's just funny, right? It almost sounds like a conspiracy theory. You know, like, we're going to allow GE to sue the American government for its suspected future profits on a deal that it hasn't even done. And that's literally what it is. So it's an extrajudicial system that, you know, she mentioned some of the conflicts of interest in the tribunals. There's no appeals. It's non-transparent. The people who are doing the judging are the same people who are incentivized to bring lawsuits and win in those lawsuits. So it's just a terrible system. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a loss of sovereignty, popular sovereignty.
Of course, yeah, absolutely, right. Right, which is very much the point. Because you know, if you have democratic rules in place and the people's will in place, then these kinds of deals will not be done because they're not good for people, and that's why a country would object to them by and large. Not always, maybe I can see a case where there's some corruption and something is squashed because it's because the local monopoly wants to protect its its thing. So I'm sure that happens. That's not really the point. The point is to jack up profits. One of the things that you were smartly talking about how big the standards are legally, and so you think about land use decisions. All sorts of things are subject to override. So say New York State wants to ban fracking, which it has done. Some investor under ISDS rules can sue under very vague standards that is something that's impeding their expected future profits. Who knows whether that deal succeeds, but it's a potent form of leverage. Okay, so any other questions on the economics? Yes, sir.
Well, maybe not quite on the economics, but we're talking about clearly it flies in the face of like international obligations, human rights, and I know in some cases it goes on other countries, possibly like war crimes. But is there any hope that maybe by the time you get to like the rights of indigenous people, like there might actually be a legal recourse against it? Like, I'm sorry, even though within its own internal framework, it's self-sustaining, but you really can't blow up that Mayan temple or something like that.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on that to know that, but I'm sorry to say that for the most part, human rights agreements internationally are weak, right? Non-enforceable. Whereas this kind of economic agreement is strong and enforceable. Yeah. So,
Well, the answer is it's an environmental review. Very corporate review. They just have to address the issue.
yeah.
So they address human rights and say there might be a slight damage, but it's not going to stop.
Yeah. So it'll sort of depend on the situation, but it's not going to be a help to the Mayan capital at the end of this because so and it's actually going to be a big problem. So the next thanks again. So the next bit, Mr. Bear. He's got my appetite. Thanks a lot. The politics of this thing, do you want to hear about that now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So this thing, we might actually win. We might win. I mean, it's really amazing. Like, they were supposed to pass this years ago. Like, the TPP was supposed to be signed, sealed, delivered, done, like 2 years ago. I don't know. I started working on this, I think 6 years ago. And we've just done a really good job on our side of raising, you've helped, and there's been a bunch of people who have done a tremendous amount of work on this to just make the politics just bone crushing on both the Democratic and on the Republican side. So on the left side, so to speak, there's an incredible coalition of environmental, consumer, democracy, labor union, and community organizations fighting this deal. And so, fast track on the Democratic side, the key vote was in the House, and the House is run by the Republicans. But they needed to get 28 Democrats to vote for it. And there's, I believe, 156 Democrats. No, there's more than that. There's like 190 Democrats. And we lost 28 of them on fast track. The TPP vote will probably lose all of those 28. We have to not lose any more, because here's what's happening on the Republican side. Okay, so Hillary Clinton is opposed to the TPP. Her politics are such that she has to be opposed to it right now. I personally think that that will actually translate after the election as well, in public. Whether in private she's going to be willing to signal that she's okay with its passage, I don't know. But the politics are pretty rough at this point for her on this. And she's clearly against it, has to say that over and over again, and has said that she's specifically against the vote in the session after the election. Because the only way that they're going to pass this thing is if they vote on it after the election. Which is another dead giveaway of how ridiculous this thing is. That they literally cannot have a vote except immediately after an election, so that they're insulated for another 2 years. On the Republican side, though, boy, it's terrible there. You know, if you were a House Republican right now, you are shitting bricks over this deal. You are freaking out. And the reason you're freaking out is because as much as Democratic-based voters don't like these deals, Republican-based voters are 15 points in the public polling that CWA did, other entities have done, more negative on the TPP, which explains how Donald Trump's rise kind of actually happened. Now, people probably don't know this, but Trump actually test drove his presidential run in South Carolina when a group called Americans United for Limited Government went to him and suggested that he look at trade and the TPP as an issue in South Carolina. And so he ran some small buys and ads, and the response from Republican-based voters, primary voters, was off the charts. They were so into it. And that was part of the reason that Trump ended up running for president. And it's a big part of the reason that his message has resonated. So he's the most naked racist. He's the only one who's openly a racist. I guess some people might argue that, but a core part of his message is misogyny, racism. Another core part of his message, though, is the TPP and trade deals. And those things together have proved to be a huge winner in a Republican primary. So he talks about trade constantly as one of his key things. And so he has made it enormously difficult. The same way that Bernie Sanders capitalized on the politics in the Democratic Party, where populism and a more left, kind of more consistent presence is what Democratic primary voters kind of want. Donald Trump capitalized on what Republican primary voters are already channeling out. So if you're a House Republican up for election, you almost certainly voted for fast track. And you face, unlike in the Democratic Party, where we don't discipline, right-wing corporate Democrats, the Republicans discipline. They have primaries. And so you voted for fast track, you're worried right now that you're going to face a primary over it. You vote for TPP, you're really, really worried. Now, I know that there are already 2 House Republicans who voted for fast track who have announced that they're going to vote against the TPP. That's very, very significant. One of them is Tom Reed from the Southern Tier, who sits on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the key committee for the TPP. And another one is in Pennsylvania. There are others that behind closed doors have said that they are going to vote against the TPP. There are not going to be as many House Republican votes for the TPP as there were for fast track. They're going to lose votes, which means they're going to have to make up votes on the Democratic side. So our job in New York City is going to be to hold the New York City delegation on this issue. In New York City, on fast track, through a lot of organizing work in the state, we got every single Democrat except 2 from New York State to vote against fast track. We have to hold every single one of those votes, or I think so it's critical to hold on to the Democrats, and that's what the activism of what you're thinking if you want to do something about this should be focused on. And I think that the people who are most vulnerable to being picked off on this, who have not announced where they're going to stand, Joe Crowley is the most likely. Now, Joe Crowley voted the right way on fast track. He has a pretty good record. He's a congressional representative in Queens and the Bronx. He has a pretty good record on these issues. But he hasn't announced where he's going to be on the TPP. And the worrisome scenario here is the president calls Joe Crowley or someone else in the New York delegation and says, I need your vote, this is my legacy, anything you want, I will get you. And the House Republicans will deliver it, and the Senate Republicans will deliver it. So that's the scenario we have to walk up. Joe Crowley has to be enormously incentivized, as he was under Fast Track, to vote against the TPP as he voted against Fast Track. There are other representatives who, on some level, might be prone to being picked off, but I think in New York City, he's really the likeliest of anyone. And by the way, I don't actually think he's going to be picked off. Like, I think he's going to stick with our side. I think that the New York City delegation is going to be solid, with the exception of Greg Meeks, who is, represents Southeast Queens, and he's the only Democrat from New York City who supported Fast Track. He's just a revolting, corrupt guy. He's bad news. Yeah, he's just awful. So, I would think about in the Bronx and in Queens, who who lives in Joe Crowley's district, call them up and ask them to call Joe Crowley's office and urge him to oppose the deal. And I think we're going to win. I really do actually at this point, because I think even though it would be a lame duck vote, I think that the politics will just crush it. That having been said, you can't, underestimate the incredible power of the president working with the Chamber of Commerce and the global elites. It's not a situation. So it's a very, very potent alliance. Yeah.
I think backtracking from
so Donald Trump, I don't really believe is against trade or against the TPP. I just think he's like latched on to that.
That's what I said, but
yeah, Mike Pence is pro TPP, so
right,
that's kind of
that should Republicans pushing out the.
I don't know. I mean, Trump is such a freako. It's hard to tell what his reasoning is. So I can't tell. I mean, certainly, virtually the entire Republican Party establishment wants the TPP to pass. That is not the case with the Democratic Party establishment. Much of the Democratic Party establishment is against. The overwhelming majority of elected Democrats are against it. So
The platform, these Democratic platform.
yeah.
No,
No, it was a major warming up. Although we did not win the platform that was explicitly against the TPP, they changed the language from basically non taking no position to taking a position against any deal that is against workers' rights, against the environment, against consumers. So they strengthened the language. Now they did not do what would have been greater, which is just flat out say no on TPP. That having said, the Democratic platform language is not binding, so it doesn't really mean that much at the end of the day. But it would have been a really strong signal had Hillary agreed to those changes, but she didn't because the president demanded that she did. That was the behind the scenes dynamic. So, yeah. Yeah.
I was just wondering if any possible.
So the conventional thinking among the people who are close to the negotiations that the deal is finalized is now approved by January 1st. So the way that these deals die is they never officially get cut off. There's no moment where they're, where it's over. But there are many international agreements that are defeated because they were never ratified. So in theory, they could be ratified at any moment. The Doha round, the MAI. There was a whole series of agreements that never saw the light of day. That's how the TPP dies in conventional expert wisdom, is that if it isn't approved by the U.S. by January 1st, it's going to die. So it's sort of, now her position has changed, a lot. As Secretary of State, she spoke in favor of it dozens of times, called it the gold standard of agreements, but has changed her position. Yes, that's right. I mean, I think it's safe to say that, that as with most elected officials, Hillary Clinton will reflect what some populace of voter pressure and money pressure is. And so it's our job to raise the voter pressure, and if we continue to do that, she will continue to be against the TPP. And will she, as president, initiate things the same way that Barack Obama did, the same way that George Bush did, George W. Bush before him, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan. This has been the pattern of U.S. presidents. So the default is that she will initiate bad trade agreements. But politics are getting harder and harder. So, I think it's our job to raise the heat. But yeah, she's been consistent on it. But hopefully we'll stay at the right place. I think the key question here is does she lobby a signal behind the scenes after the election that she is okay with a few Democrats I'm optimistic that she will not. It's just too politics are too local. And I think that she'll only do that, by the way. I think the president will only ask her to do that, and he will only make serious pressure calls himself if the Republicans have enough votes. And I don't know if the Republicans are going to have enough votes.
I mean, there's always a possibility of
Yes.
and I mean, it seems as though that, like the latest polls for maybe show Trump ahead in Florida.
Hillary's email scandal and the FBI getting it, are pretty bad for her politically. But hopefully that is just temporary, and she would be elected. I mean, even more recent round of polls, by the way, from Maris, as opposed to the impact polls, have Hillary inside the So I personally think that it is highly
Besides the Cali push, what else?
I think that's really it. Yeah, I wouldn't do anything if you're in New York City. Don't kid yourself. I think that's there's a swing vote. We got to nail him down. The sooner we nail him down, the sooner we win. He's got to say in public time against the TPP. And if he says that this summer, or in September, or in October, it matters a lot when he says that he's leadership. He's high up. He's a swing vote. He's on the way to the So I wouldn't really bother with anything else, to be honest. Charlie Rangel is possibly someone who could move on this issue. I could see, but he's been good on it, and he's retired. And there's no left over in men. I would call if you live in Charlie Rangel's office and thank him for his position and ask him to hold him. And that's what he's been saying consistently over and over again in public. He's against it. He mutters in DC that he would be open to the, that he's, he hints that he would do something different. Other questions for the perhaps, yeah. So anyway, thank you very much, and have a great day. Okay. Sorry.
Thanks for giving the economic lowdown on how conversion of capital works and the profit motive of these corporations, ISDS, as well as megatrade deals and thank you for the updates on the so for our next speaker, we have Phil Jocelyn of the Canadian Solidarity of El Salvador to talk about ISDS and its impact on the people of El Salvador. So let's welcome Phil.
I'm going to sit also and not talk very long. Basically, the main impacts of the ISDS in El Salvador have been around the case, the Pacific Rim Mining Corporation, Gold Mining Corporation, in Cabañas Department of El Salvador's northern part of the country. I mean, a little background. I'm sure many of you have heard that El Salvador went through horrendous, war during the 1980s, where 70,000 Salvadorans were killed. The war went from 1980 to 1992. The area that this mine was supposed to be built was heavily impacted by that war. I actually walked through that area during the war, and it was basically a free fire zone. We were dodging helicopters during that time, and anybody, most of the people that we met there were living in constant fear of being murdered by either by aircraft flying overhead or by the army sweeps that were taking place. So in the mid-2000s, the Pacific Rim Mining Company began to do exploratory drilling in Cabañas province near the town of San Isidro in Cabañas. They had been given a permit to do this exploratory drilling, and they decided that they wanted to go ahead and begin to open up a gold mine. Now the gold mine process that they were proposing to use is a cyanide leaching process that uses enormous amounts of water and cyanide to leach the gold out of the ore. So they bring up a bunch of ore, they grind it up, run it through this bath of cyanide and water, and the gold settles out. The people in the area, when they began to get wind of what was going to be happening to their water supply, well, first of all, they were beginning to lose their water supply because the company's drilling operation had already disrupted much of many of the wells and water sources in the area, and people were beginning to speak against it, and there was a group of local citizens who got together to oppose it. They were led by a guy named Salvador. The company, it's alleged that the company hired people to, you have to realize this area during the war was heavily armed. Everybody was armed, and there were death squads operating in this area. There were, paramilitaries operating in this area, and it wasn't a very big stretch for the, for people to go to some of these paramilitary characters and say, it sure would be great if these environmentalists disappeared. And so the people who, opposing the mine began to get that place. And eventually, Marcelo Rivera, who, was the leader of the group opposing the mine, was murdered and tortured, found at the bottom of the well. His body was found at the bottom of the well with signs of torture. His arms and legs bound, and many signs of torture. The company, of course, claimed absolutely no connection, but people in the region realized there was a connection. People from the company, involving people who had been involved in the paramilitary in killing some of these. So this is like in the mid 2000s. At that point, the government, which was a right-wing government, actually, the Arena government, Arena is the political party in El Salvador that was ruling the country during the war, and was supported by the United States, and actually was the founder of most of the restaurants that operated. But even they did not. They had the company was putting pressure on them. Okay, we want a permit to begin mining, and they kept. The government kept kind of stalling it, and because they had an election coming up in 2009, and they realized that if they gave in to this mining company, they pay for the cost for it. The reality is that this mine would sit in the Rio Limpa Basin, which provides 60 to 70% of all the water that is used by people in El Salvador. So this would effectively wipe out, if there were an accident with the cyanide leaching process and cyanide was released into the environment, El Salvador could lose the vast majority of its drinking water. And El Salvador already has a serious problem with water. The UN has estimated that the only other country with a worse problem with potable water in the hemisphere is Haiti. So the government stalled, and then in 2009, the FMLN, the Fargo Marquis Front for National Liberation, which was the leftist guerrillas during the war, they had formed a political party at the end of the war, and they won the election. And the FMLN president at the time, one of his first acts actually was to ban metallic mining and to try to get a law through the National Assembly to make it permanent. Now, the Pacific Rim, after the mining ban went into effect, took the case to the ICSID and said, listen, we want. Initially, they were asking for $77 million. That was their estimated profit that they had hoped to realize from mining operation. So this is in 2009. Now, the government, the FMLN government, and Mauricio Funes, who was president at that time, in 2009 until 2014, was unable to get a law passed in. And so it's, there was still a moratorium on mining, but it was based on a presidential decree. Something like DACA, which could go away at any time. And so this case dragged on through the ICSID, and there have been a few ins and outs of it. I mean, the Pacific Rim Mining Company was based in Canada. Now, Canada was not a signer of the Central American Free Trade Agreement. It was under the Central American Free Trade Agreement that the Pacific Rim was taking the case to the ICSID. in order to get standing under the Central America Free Trade Agreement, Pacific Rim just simply opened up a subsidiary in Nevada and said, okay, we're a U.S. company now, and therefore, we're good under capital. In 2012, actually, the ICSID ruled against Pacific Rim and said, setting up a subsidiary just so you get communism. So they ruled against them. But then the Salvadoran legislature passed a law allowing companies who were, and this is, the legislature is still dominated by the right wing. So the legislature passed a law saying, okay, now, actually, if companies wish to, have a problem with the Salvadoran legal system, want to take cases to the ICSID, they have to. And so Pacific Rim went back after initially being ruled against them, they went back. Now, where the case sits now is that, first of all, Pacific Rim now has gone out of business, and their assets were bought up by Oceanic Gold, an Australian company, which, although they don't have standing under the Central America Free Trade Agreement, under Salvadoran law now they do, which is, like I said, pretty convoluted, but that's okay with the ICSID. And they're giving standing. And so the case was heard on merits in September 2014. But since then, that was in September 2014. Since then, there has been no rule. What many people think, this is one of the longest cases to drag on. From 2009 to now, 2016, and it's still, so it's 7 years. This case has been before this tribunal, and there's still no resolution. And the Salvadoran government has now had to pay $12.5 million to defend this case, before the tribunal. It's still very unclear how the tribunal is going to hold. And what a number of people are beginning to think is that maybe they're as for instance, with the vulture funds in Argentina, they just kept that case in court forever until finally they got a government that would rule in their favor. And so one of the fears that people have is that the ICSID will just kind of drag it out until the next election, and then hoping that by that time, there'll be a Arena government that will be much more sympathetic and will allow them to run. So that's kind of where it stands now. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So let's, as you're talking about, your website.
Yeah, it's mining. Yeah, there's yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, you can actually, well, the city can help you. Brother, rational political, so, yeah. 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 What did people actually do? I think the people in the region, definitely want to see the money. There's most people in the country, the last 4 years, 60%. I think, they're facing a legislature that not have, and at this point, the doesn't.
So, this was not on the program, but we thought that it would be good to have visual so it demonstrates what happened, and still happening in Salvador. So after this, we also have another of and someone from the background actually but they're right here. Thank you so much for
from the pristine lands of the poorest countries on earth, and environmental disasters that will pollute these lands for centuries. Even worse, those who have stood up against this destruction, like Marcelo Rivera, have been threatened and killed.
Bueno, algunos, era como una señal clara de decirlo, mira, para que no se caigan nos vamos a matar a todos.
Entonces, por último, amenazaron a mi hija que tenía 2 años.
En estos últimos años, nada menos el año pasado, asesinaron a un hijo de una mujer que es líder del movimiento ambiental.
Porque todos los mineros
los que trabajaron dentro de esa mina, todos murieron, ¿verdad?
In El Salvador, years of contamination from mining and agricultural chemicals have already poisoned more than 90% of the nation's drinking water. The United Nations has declared El Salvador's environment the most vulnerable on earth. This tiny, densely populated country is the most water-starved in the hemisphere, second only to Haiti.
El Salvador es un país que ha luchado por la vida.
Recently, an international delegation from 14 countries on 4 continents traveled to El Salvador to see with their own eyes the terrible impact of mining and the dramatic mobilization of a people fighting for their land and their lives.
Vamos con la injusticia, también la comodidad, para romper el silencio.
The delegation first met with legal, environmental, human rights, and community development experts at the Jesuit University of Central America in San Salvador.
La minería metálica amenaza la supervivencia de la sociedad salvadoreña. La minería metálica vendría a agravar la crisis hídrica que tenemos en el país. Un país densamente poblado, con mucha extensión territorial, en el cual ya la crisis del agua es la principal crítica del agua. Utilizar agua para la mina y la posibilidad de una contaminación con cianuro del agua sería catastrófico para nuestro país.
Entonces la minería para nosotros es muerte. Una empresa que destruye la vida de las comunidades.
El derecho al agua es un derecho humano fundamental. Somos casi el 70% de la población que obtenemos el agua del río Lempa. Si no tenemos agua, no hay vida. Si no tenemos agua, no hay condiciones humanas para que un pueblo viva. Y El Salvador se está acercando a no tener condiciones humanas de vida.
The fight today is against Pacific Rim, the Australian-Canadian company that is demanding a permit to open a gold mine in the headwaters of the Limpo River, the river that supplies 2/3 of El Salvador's population with drinking water.
Y en El Salvador, en un espacio tan pequeño, la complejidad de las cuencas hidrográficas es muy amplia. Por lo tanto, no hay un territorio en El Salvador en el que haya minería metálica sin que dañe las fuentes de agua. Por eso es nuestra preocupación de que no haya minería metálica en el país.
El Salvador's opposition isn't simply speculative. Salvadorans have seen gold mining's impact on their land and water and people. From a small mountain near the little village of San Sebastian, La Union, a series of American mining companies extracted more than 50 tons of gold between 1904 and 1983.
Y que produce el oro más valioso procede de 24 quilates. Entonces, esto pues, se llevaron toda la riqueza, ¿verdad? Todo el tesoro de nuestra comunidad, no dejaron nada, sino que las enfermedades, sobre todo los mineros, los que trabajaron dentro de las minas, todos murieron, ¿verdad? De insuficiencia renal, de los pulmones, ¿verdad? Todos amarillos. Porque no tiene un ácido ahí sale un agua que si ustedes meten con zapatos de cuero, se corta. Las mujeres lavando con la misma agua verde y amarilla. La ropa, ¿por qué? Porque aquí un barril de agua vale $3. Los cosas se tienen, pero no tienen, no puede comprar el barril de agua.
Así que nosotros es parte de lo que nos conmueve nuestro trabajo, ¿verdad? a defender la dignidad del ser humano como personas, como creyentes que somos, como hijos de Dios, y la defensa de los derechos de la tierra, que es una madre que nos está alimentando.
The scourge of mining poisons more than water and farmland. The foreign-based mining companies bring with them multi-million-dollar slush funds to purchase support and silence opposition, dividing communities and sowing discord with disastrous consequences. Marcelo Rivera was a leader of his community's opposition to Pacific Rim. Friends and family found his body at the bottom of a well.
En ese marco también se dio la entrega de recuperación y encontramos un cadáver, ya, donde que había sido con señas torturado. Le habían cuidado los testículos, le habían quitado las uñas, estaba atado de pies y manos, le habían como ponido un lazo en la boca para que se caigan, le habían metido el dedo gordo en la boca. Fue una escena bien complicada y bueno, algunos era como una señal clara de decirlo, mira, para que no se caigan nos vamos a matar a todos.
And Marcelo Rivera was not the only one killed. Over the past few years, 3 other anti-mining activists or their close family have been assassinated. Along with threats came offers of money. Radio Victoria is a small radio station out in the countryside that has reported extensively on the struggle over mining.
Decir que la Pacific Rim, por ejemplo, quiso comprar publicidad de la Victoria. Y llegó a ofrecer unos $8,000 mensuales por pautar campaña publicitaria de ellos, la campaña de la verde.
But the station's research into metallic mining led them to reject the company's money.
En el caso de Radio Victoria toma posición contra de la minería, lo decimos abiertamente, en contra de un proyecto que atenta contra la vida.
And when Radio Victoria refused to be a voice for Pacific Rim, the station became a target. In the middle of the night,
Atentaban las torres de transmisión, nos dañaron el sistema eléctrico, nos dañaron un transmisor, y se robaron una antena. En las instalaciones de la radio, muchísima gente de las comunidades nos acompañó en ese proceso difícil que vivimos como radio. Venía a cuidar las instalaciones de la radio, gente de las comunidades, porque se renovaba y ellos nos decían claramente que iban a quemar las instalaciones de la radio. En el caso personal, vivo en una comunidad un poco alejada del centro, nosotros vamos a perder veces en mi casa, con armas largas, con intención de asesinarme. Entonces, por último, amenazaron a mi hija que tenía 2 años.
What we've seen in El Salvador is very strong community resistance to mining that have resulted in a national moratorium on metal mining. And there is broad public support for a permanent ban on metal mining. 62% of the population would like to see a permanent ban on metal mining.
Nosotros como Radio Victoria les pedimos a la comunidad internacional siempre el apoyo moral, el apoyo, estar siempre pendiente de todos estos problemas que pasan en estos lugares.
and the international community is responding. At the request of La Mesa, the coalition of anti-mining forces in El Salvador, we are building a worldwide network to support the people of El Salvador.
And if we can win in El Salvador, this would be a victory for all of us. And if there's a loss in El Salvador, it would also be a loss for all of us. And this is why this mission has drawn so much attention around the world. It's why we've got people from 12 different countries, 22 different organizations who gathered in this community of Cabañas, which is the heart of resistance to mining in El Salvador. We gathered here, to hear the story of hope, to see how we can support internationally, because we see this as an international issue.
This includes even far Melbourne, Australia, home of Oceanico, the parent company of Canada's Pacific Rim.
What I hope to do when I get back is make people aware of the actions of Oceanic Gold in the picking up the case for Pacific Rim, prosecuting the people